Hello, hello, hello! Greetings, salutations, konnichiwa, and every other form of green across this vast, marvelous multiverse. I am Matsu Quinox. This is Horace, and welcome back once more, my dear scholars, to the study. Hello there, hello there, hello there. Hello there, Sophia Ignace. Welcome. Congratulations on getting first, and thank you for the resubscribe. Hello there, Julian20. Welcome. Hello there, Firefly. Welcome. Hello, 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 all my dearest, most wonderful scholars. Oh my goodness. Oh, hello there, Private Maverick. Welcome. So, before we start tonight, oh my goodness, a little explanation of what happened. So myself, Horace, Ovid, and Virgil, we all, not to beat around the bush, got sick. Um, it was, yeah. As you can probably tell from my voice is not. Oh, Sophia, I saw you. I said hello, Sophia. Welcome. Congratulations on getting first. Welcome, Sophia. I'm sorry if that seemed like I was ignoring you. Um, Congratulations on getting first, and thank you for the resubscribe. Oh my goodness, I'm so glad to have you here. Oh, as I was saying, Horace, my son. Oh, sorry, Sophia. Oh, I to beat around the bush, I got sick, along with everyone in the entire study. You can probably tell my voice is still not all there. Um, it really did a number on me. Um, but we only have a couple chapters left of this wonderful reading. I thought, I can manage. I can do this. We can do this, my dear scholars. Don't you agree? Oh, but I will tell you, it is very, very hard to talk right now. I could feel it's a lot of effort than my normal voice. Ugh. And I got a lot of water with me, just in case. But it will take me time to get back to 100%. So, how are all of you, my dear scholars, doing? How are you doing this fine afternoon, evening, or morning? Firefly, just don't overdo it. I'll try not to. I'll be very careful. How are you all doing while I was gone? Are you well? Sophia Ignace tired. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Julian20, getting over an illness too. Oh, my dear. I hope it's not the same illness I got. Sophia Ignace, gonna crawl in bed and nap. Yes, yes, that's good, good. Sleep is best. It's always important to get plenty of rest wherever you are. Yes, it was quite a time for me. My first 3 days I actually didn't eat or drink any water. I was that miserable. It was just terrible. Oh, I'm trying to get myself hydrated enough so my voice is okay. I'll try not to cough during this stream, but you might hear a cough or two come out. So yes, tonight's stream might be a little bit shorter. We'll see. Um, I don't think the chapters tonight are all that long, but we will do our best, won't we, my dear scholars? But yes, I digress. Um, Last time we left off, Phileas Fogg, who has been going around the world in 80 days to win a bet, has finally reached England after all this time. And the moment he set foot on England, he has been arrested by Inspector Fix, who believes that he's involved in a bank robbery of the Bank of England, which of course we know he wasn't. But now it looks like, what is Fogg gonna do? I mean, can he bribe his way out? Can he find some sort of trick to get himself out? Because he only has so much time left before he loses the bet. So then, my dear scholars, shall we continue our reading and finish off Around the World in 80 Days? I think this might go a little faster than usual. What say you? Julian 20, yes, please. Okay, okay. 1 second. So then, my dear scholars, sit back, relax, have a hot or cold beverage of your liking, dim the lights if you wish, and let us continue our reading of Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Chapter 34, which provides Passepartout with the opportunity to make an appalling but perhaps original play on words. Okay, we're done. We're done. We're done. I am not. I refuse. I refuse to read any further. Nope. 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 We are done. We're done. Okay. Okay. Done. Okay. Okay. Good night, everyone. Good night. I have just been informed that I am somehow I am somehow bound by contract to stream. I think that's made up, but I am doing this under protest. The fact that the next chapter obviously will contain a pun, which is not something I looked forward to once I started streaming again. Obviously, I am doing this under protest. And thank you for the watch streak, Private Maverick. 20 stream streak. Congratulations. Phileas Fogg was in prison. He had been locked up in the gaol of the Custom House in Liverpool, and was to spend the night there before being transferred to London. At the time of the arrest, Passepartout's instinct was to throw himself at the detective. He had been restrained by some policemen. Sophia Ignacio, wait, you're here again? I'm confused. I was leaving in protest because there is going to be a pun in this chapter. And you know, Sophia, my feelings on puns. Mrs. Ayoda was horrified at the brutality of it all, and because she knew nothing about the background, was unable to understand what was happening. Sophia, I legit thought you left. I was going to, but I was dragged back. Passepartout explained the situation to her. Mr. Fogg, this upright and courteous gentleman, to whom she owed her life, had been arrested like a common thief. The young woman protested against this allegation. She felt deep indignation, and tears poured down her cheeks when she saw she was powerless to do anything, to attempt anything to save her Savior. As for Fix, he had arrested the gentleman because his sense of duty told him to do so, irrespective of whether or not he was guilty. The courts would decide that. But then something occurred to Passepartout, the terrible thought that he was the cause of this whole disaster. Why on earth had he concealed the situation from Mr. Fogg? When Fix had revealed that he was a police inspector and that his task was to arrest Mr. Fogg, why had he taken it upon himself not to alert his master? If he had warned him, his master would certainly have given Fix proof of his innocence and would have shown him his error. In any case, he wouldn't have dragged the wretched detective behind him all around the world, and at his own expense when the man's main concern was to arrest him the moment he set foot on British soil. Firefly, the puns, they are scary, nasty things. They are indeed. What he thought about When he thought about all his foolishness and carelessness, the poor fellow was overcome with remorse. He cried. He was a pathetic sight. He wanted to knock himself senseless. Despite the cold, Mrs. Aouda and he had stayed under the portico of the custom house. Neither of them wanted to leave the place. They wanted to see Mr. Fogg just one more time. As for the gentleman himself, he was well and truly ruined, financially speaking, and just as he was reaching his goal. His arrest meant the end of everything for him. When he had arrived in Liverpool at 20 minutes to midday on the 21st of December, he had until 8:45 to show up at the Reform Club, in other words, 9 hours and 15 minutes, and he only needed 6 to get to London. Anyone going into the custom house at that moment would have found Mr. Fogg sitting motionless on a wooden bench, showing no sign of anger and looking as imperturbable as ever. It was impossible to tell whither he was resigned, but this last blow didn't seem to have affected him, at least outwardly. Was there burning away inside him some secret rage, frightening because it was bottled up until the last moment when it would burst out with unstoppable force? No one could tell. But Phileas Fogg was sitting there, calm, waiting. But for what? Did he still retain some hope? Did he still believe he could succeed after the prison door had closed behind him? Whatever the case, Mr. Fogg had carefully placed his watch on the table, and he was looking at the hands move forward. Not a word crossed his lips, but there was an especially intent look on his face. In any event, the situation was grim, and for anyone unable to read what was going through his mind, it may be summed up as follows. If he was an honest man, Phileas Fogg was ruined. If he was a criminal, he had been caught. Did it occur to him at this point to try to escape? Did he think of looking for a possible way out of where he was being held? Did he plan to run away? It might be tempting to think so, because at one point he walked around the room. But the door was firmly locked, and the windows were equipped with iron bars. So he went to sit down again, and took out of his pocketbook his travel schedule. On the line where he had written 21st of December, Saturday, Liverpool, he added 80th day, 11:40 a.m. Then he waited. Excuse me. 1 o'clock struck on the custom house clock. Mr. Fogg noted that his watch was 2 minutes ahead of this clock. 2 o'clock. Assuming that he got onto an express train there and then, he could still get to London and to the Reform Club before 8:45 in the evening. He frowned slightly. At 33 minutes past 2, there was a commotion outside, the noise of doors being flung open. Passpartour's voice could be heard, and Fix's. Phileas Fogg's face lit up for a moment. The cell door opened and he saw Mrs. Aouda, Passepartout, and Fix rushing towards him. Fix was out of breath, and his hair all over the place. He was unable to speak properly. "Sir," he stammered. "Sir, sorry. Unfortunate likeness. Thief arrested 3 days ago. You free." Phileas Fogg was free. He went up to the detective. He looked him straight in the eye, and with the only rapid movement he had ever made or ever would make in his life, he struck his arms back and then, with the precision of an automaton, struck the unfortunate inspector with both fists. "We'll hit!" exclaimed Passepartout, who allowed himself an appalling play on words, worthy of a true Frenchman, by adding, "Good heavens, that's what I'd call a striking example of the benefits of an English education." Oh dear, 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 dear. Fix, who had been knocked to the floor, didn't say a word. He'd only got what he deserved. But immediately Mr. Fogg, Mrs. Aouda, and Passepartout left the custom house. They jumped into a cab and within a few minutes were at Liverpool station. Phileas Fogg asked if there was an express ready to leave for London. It was 2:40. The express had left 35 minutes earlier. Phileas Fogg then ordered a special train. There were several high-speed locomotives with steam up, but for operating reasons the special train was unable to leave the station until 3 o'clock. By 3 o'clock, after having a word with the engine driver about a bonus he could earn, Phileas Fogg was speeding off towards London in the company of the young woman and his faithful servant. They needed to cover the distance between Liverpool and London in 5.5 hours. This was a perfectly reasonable proposition when the line was clear all the way, but there were unavoidable delays, and so by the time the gentlemen arrived at the station, all the clocks in London were showing 10 minutes to 9. After completing his journey around the world, Phileas Fogg had arrived 5 minutes late. He had lost. Oh dear. Poor Phileas. It should be noted in the 1955 version of the book, the film version, Phileas doesn't actually punch out Fix. Instead, he just tells him what an appalling whist player he is and leaves it at that, and that he didn't enjoy his company at all. Hmm. Excuse me, 1 second. Ooh. Chapter 35, in which Passepartout doesn't need to be told twice to do as his master orders. The following day, the inhabitants of Savile Row would certainly have been surprised to be informed that Mr. Fogg was back in residence. The windows and doors were all closed. Nothing had changed from the outside. What had happened was that after leaving the station, Phileas Fogg had told Passepartout to buy some food, and he had gone back to his house. The gentleman had responded to this blow with his usual impassiveness. He was ruined, and it was all the fault of this bungling police inspector. After traveling at a steady pace during this long journey, after overcoming 1,000 obstacles, braving 1,000 dangers, and finding the time to do some good on the way, to fail at his port of arrival in such violent circumstances, which he could not have foreseen and was powerless to combat, was a terrible thing. Of the sizable sum of money he had taken with him when he set out, only an insignificant amount was left over. All that remained of his fortune was the £20,000 deposited with Baring Brothers, and even those £20,000 were what he owed to his colleagues from the Reform Club. After spending so much money, even if he had won his bet, he probably wouldn't have been very much richer. Anyway, that probably wouldn't have been his aim, since he was the sort of man who bet on honor, not gain. But losing his bet spelt his financial ruin. In any case, the gentleman had made up his mind. He knew what was left for him to do. A room in the house in Savile Row had been set aside for Mrs. Aouda. The young woman was desperate. From some comments of Mr. Fogg, she had concluded that he was planning some fateful deed. It is of course well known to what dreadful extremes English monomaniacs can be driven by their single-minded obsessions. This was why Passepartout was keeping a careful eye on his master, without making it obvious. But before anything else, the good fellow had gone up to his bedroom and switched off the gas lamp, which had been burning away for 80 days. He had found the bill from the gas company in the letterbox, and he thought it was high time he put an end to the costs he had incurred. The night went by. Mr. Fogg had gone to bed. But did he sleep? As for Miss Aouda, she was unable to get any rest at all. Passepartout, for his part, had kept watch outside his master's room, like a faithful dog. The next day Mr. Fogg called for him, and told him in a few words as possible to see to Mrs. Aouda's breakfast. All he wanted for himself was a cup of tea and a piece of toast. He would like Mrs. Aouda to excuse him for lunch and dinner, because he needed to devote all his time to putting his affairs in order. He would not be going downstairs. Only in the evening would he ask Mrs. Aouda's permission to speak to her for a few moments. Having been informed of his master's schedule for the day, all Passepartout could do was to fall in with it. He looked at his master, who was as impassive as ever, and he couldn't find the courage to leave his room. He was downcast and beset with remorse. "Oh, hello there, Zen. Welcome! We are reading the last 4 chapters of Around the World in 80 Days. Pardon the state of my voice. I am still recovering from a slight sickness. So if my voice seems a little bit crackly, a little bit rocky, that's why." All Passepartout could do was to fall in with it. He looked at his master, who was as impassive as ever, and he couldn't find the courage to leave his room. He was downcast and beset with remorse, because he felt more and more responsible for this irreparable disaster. If only he had warned Mr. Fogg and disclosed Fix's plans to him, Mr. Fogg would certainly not have trailed the detective along behind him all the way to Liverpool, and then Passepartout couldn't stand it any longer. "Master, Mr. Fogg!" he exclaimed. "Curse me, it's all my fault that—" "I am not going to accuse anyone," replied Mr. Fogg in the calmest tone of voice imaginable. Off you go." Passepartout left the room and went off to see the young woman to tell her what his master's intentions were.
"Madame, I am absolutely powerless on my own. I have no influence whatsoever over my master. Perhaps you—"
"What influence could I have?" replied Mrs. Ayoda. "Mr. Fogg is impervious to any. Has he ever realized how much I wanted to pour out my gratitude to him? Has he ever been able to read my heart? My friend, you must not leave him alone, not for a single moment. You say that he has expressed the intention of speaking to me this evening?"
"Yes, madame. It must be to do with safeguarding your position in England."
"Let's wait and see," replied the young woman, looking thoughtful. Excuse me. And so for the whole of that Sunday, the house in Savile Row looked deserted, and for the first time since living there, Phileas Fogg did not go to his club as Big Bang struck 11:30. In any case, what would have been the point in the gentleman going to the Reform Club? His colleagues were no longer expecting him, since on the previous evening, on the faithful date of Saturday, the 21st of December, Phileas Fogg had not shown up in the lounge of the Reform Club by 8:45. He had lost his bet. There was no longer even any need for him to go to his bank to withdraw the sum of £20,000. His opponents already had in their hands a check he had signed, and all that was needed was to put the check through his account with Baring Brothers for the £20,000 to be credited to them. As there was no point in Mr. Fogg going out, so he didn't do so. He stayed in his room and put his affairs in order. Passepartout kept going up and down the staircase in the house in Savile Row. Time went by very slowly for the poor fellow. He listened outside the door of his master's bedroom, and did so without thinking that he was being in the least indiscreet. He looked through the keyhole with the firm conviction that he was entitled to do so. Passepartout feared a catastrophe at any moment. Sometimes he thought about Fix, but a change had come over him. He no longer bore a grudge against the police inspector. Like everybody else, Fix had been wrong about Phileas Fogg, and in trailing him and arresting him he had only been doing his duty, whereas he, Passepartout, he was overwhelmed by the thought of this, and he considered himself the most wretched of creatures. When eventually Passepartout felt too unhappy to be alone, he knocked on Mrs. Ayoda's door, went into her bedroom, sat down in a corner without saying anything, and looked at the young woman, who still seemed lost in her thoughts. At about 7:30 in the evening, Mr. Fogg sent a message to Mrs. Ayoda, asking to be allowed to see her, and a few moments later, the young woman and he were alone together in her room. Phileas Fogg took a chair, and sat down near the fireplace, opposite Mrs. Ayoda. His face was expressionless. The Fogg who had come back was exactly the same Fogg as had gone away. The same calm and the same impassiveness. He remained silent for 5 minutes. Then, looking up at Mrs. Ayoda, he said, "Madam, will you forgive me for having brought you to England?" "Forgive you, Mr. Fogg?" replied Mrs. Ayoda, struggling to keep her emotions under control. "Please allow me to finish," continued Mr. Fogg. "When I conceived the idea of taking you far away from your own country, which had become so dangerous for you, I was a wealthy man, and I was expecting to bestow some of that wealth on you. Your life would have been happy and free. Now I am penniless." "I know, Mr. Fogg," the young woman replied, "and I would like to ask you something in turn. Will you forgive me for having followed you? And who can tell? For perhaps having contributed to your ruin by delaying you.
Madam, it was impossible for you to remain in India, and your safety could only be guaranteed by making sure that you are far enough away not to fall into the hands of those fanatics again.
So, Mr. Fogg, Mrs. Aota continued, not content to rescue me from a horrible death, you also felt duty bound to provide for me abroad?
Yes, madam, but things have turned out against me. However, I ask to be allowed to bestow on you the little I still have.
But what will become of you, Mr. Fogg?
Asked Mrs. Aota.
I, madam, the gentleman replied coldly, need nothing. But how so will you face the fate that awaits you?
In the appropriate way, replied Mr. Fogg.
In any case, went on Mrs. Aota, poverty can afflict a person such as you. Your friends,
I have no friends, madam.
your relatives?
I have no relatives left.
I feel truly sorry for you then, Mr. Fogg, because loneliness is a sad thing. No one to pour your heart out to, and yet people say that even poverty is bearable as long as there are two of you.
So it is said, madam.
Mr. Fogg, Mrs. Aota then said, as she got to her feet and offered the gentleman her hand, would you like both a relative and a friend? Would you like to have me as your wife? When he heard these words, Mr. Fogg also got to his feet. There was a sort of unusual gleam in his eyes, and his lips looked as if they were trembling. Mrs. Aota looked at him. The sincerity, uprightness, firmness, and gentleness of the beautiful gaze of a noblewoman who will risk anything to save the person to whom she owes everything first surprised and then penetrated him. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if to prevent this gaze from going any deeper into him. When he opened them, he said simply, I love you. Yes, truly, by everything that is sacred in the world, I love you, and I am wholly yours. Ah! Exclaimed Mrs. Aota, placing her hand on her heart. Passepartout was run for. He came straight away. Mr. Fogg was still holding Mrs. Aota's hand in his. Passepartout understood, and his broad face beamed like the midday sun in a tropical sky. Mr. Fogg asked whether it was too late to give notice to the Reverend Samuel Wilson of the parish of Marylebone. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Zen, ayo. Passepartout put on his best smile. Never too late, he said. It was only 8:05. It'll be for tomorrow. Monday? Oh, wait, no, that's Passepartout. My mistake. It'll be for tomorrow. Monday, he said. Tomorrow, Monday? Asked Mr. Fogg, looking at the young woman. Tomorrow, Monday, replied Mrs. Aota. Passepartout went out of the house, running as fast as he could. Oh, that's a sweet thing to happen. Firefly, don't they have to have the bands read? I don't know. I really don't. Then again, Vern is
probably not thinking about that little detail and really doesn't care about it. So who knows? Chapter 36, in which shares in Phileas Fogg are back in demand on the stock market. Now is the time to recount how public opinion suddenly changed when the news broke that the real bank robber, a certain James Strand, had been arrested on 17th of December in Edinburgh. 3 days earlier, Phileas Fogg had been a criminal ruthlessly hunted down by the police, and now he was the most respectable of gentlemen, who with a mathematical sense of timing was completing his eccentric journey around the world. It created a huge splash and sensation in the newspapers. A whole betting fraternity, both for and against, which had forgotten all about this business, suddenly reappeared from nowhere. All the earlier transactions were valid again. All the financial commitments were once more binding, and it must also be said that the betting started up again with renewed vigor. Phileas Fogg's name was once more in demand on the London market. The gentleman's 5 colleagues from the Reform Club spent those 3 days in a state of some anxiety. The Phileas Fogg they had forgotten about was reappearing before their very eyes. Where was he at that particular moment? By the 17th of December, the day when James Strand had been arrested, Phileas Fogg had been away for 76 days, and they hadn't heard a word from him. Had he been killed? Had he given up the struggle, or was he still continuing his journey, following the agreed route? Firefly, FYI, Google says it became a legal requirement in 1215. Oh, interesting. Interesting. I did not know that. Thank you for that bit of trivia, Firefly. Would he suddenly show up outside the drawing room of the Reform Club on Saturday, the 21st of December at 8:45 in the evening, like an incarnation of the god of punctuality? It would be impossible to describe the anxiety that afflicted that section of English society over those 3 days. Telegrams were sent to America and to Asia in an attempt to get news of Phileas Fogg. Someone was sent morning and evening to keep a lookout on the house in Savile Road, to no avail. Even the police had no idea. Excuse me. Even the police had no idea of the whereabouts of Inspector Fix, who had so unfortunately followed the wrong lead. None of this, however, prevented the betting from starting up again, and on an even greater scale. Like a racehorse, Phileas Fogg was now into the final straight. The odds quoted against him were no longer 100 to 1, but 20, 10, 5, and the elderly invalid Lord Albemarle was putting money on him at evens. On Saturday evening there was therefore a large crowd in Pall Mall and the surrounding area. It looked like a huge gathering of stockbrokers permanently stationed outside the Reform Club. No traffic could get through. People were talking and arguing and shouting over the value of Phileas Fogg shares as if they were government bonds. Oh, excuse me, my dear scholars. Okay. Okay. There we are. Excuse me. Like a bad penny, as soon as I come back, they show up. The police had considerable difficulty in controlling the crowds of onlookers, and the nearer it got to the time when Phileas Fogg was supposed to arrive, the more the tension and excitement mounted. That evening, the gentleman's 5 colleagues had been together for 9 hours in the drawing room of the Reform Club. The 2 bankers, John Sullivan and Samuel Fallottine, the engineer Andrew Stewart, Gulther Ralph, one of the directors of the Bank of England, and the brewer Thomas Flanagan were all waiting anxiously. At the moment when the clock in the main drawing room showed 8:25, Andrew Stewart got up and said,
Gentlemen, in 20 minutes the deadline agreed between Mr. Fogg and ourselves will have expired.
"What time did the last train from Liverpool arrive?" asked Thomas Flanagan. 7:23, replied Gulther Ralph, "and the next train doesn't arrive until 10 past midnight."
Well then, gentlemen, continued Andrew Stewart, if Phileas Fogg had arrived on the 7:23, he would have been here by now. We can therefore assume that we've won the bet.
"Let's wait before we come to any conclusions," replied Samuel Fallottine. "You know that our colleague is an eccentric of the highest order. It's well known how exact he is in everything. He never arrives too early or too late, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if he showed up here at the last minute."
Personally, said Andrew Stewart, extremely tense as usual, if he was standing in front of me, I wouldn't believe my own eyes.
"I agree." No, wait, which was Tom? Oh, Thomas, a different voice. Hard to remember all these voices. "I agree," went on Thomas Flanagan. "Phileas Fogg's plan was completely crazy. However exact he may have been, it was impossible for him to prevent unavoidable delays from happening. A delay of 2 or 3 days was enough to jeopardize his journey."
You'll note, in addition, added John Sullivan, that we have received no news at all of our colleague, and yet there was plenty of opportunities for him to send a telegram during his travels. He has lost, gentlemen, Andrew Stewart replied. He has lost hands down. You know in any case that the China, the only steamer from New York that he could have caught to get to Liverpool in time, arrived yesterday. Well, here's the passengers list, as published in the Shipping Gazette, and Phileas Fogg's name is not on it. Even if luck was on his side, our colleague would still hardly have reached America. I would reckon that he's about 20 days at least behind schedule, and that poor old Lord Albemarle will also lose his £5,000.
"It's obvious," replied Gulther Ralph, "and tomorrow all we have to do is to present Mr. Fogg's cheque at Bowring Brothers." At that moment the drawing room clock showed 8:40.
Another 5 minutes, said Andrew Stewart.
The 5 colleagues looked at one another. It can be assumed that their hearts were beginning to beat a bit faster, because even for such experienced gamblers, the amount of money at stake was considerable. But they didn't want any of this to show, because, following Samuel Fallotine's suggestion, they seated themselves around a card table.
I wouldn't give up my £4,000 share in the bet, said Andrew as he sat down, even if someone gave me £3,999 for it.
The hands on the clock were showing at that moment 8:42. Excuse me. Excuse me. The players had taken their cards, but all the time they kept staring at the clock. However sure they were of themselves, it can safely be said that they had never found the minutes so long. Which one was Thomas?
"8:43,
said Thomas Flanagan, cutting the pack that Gulther Ralph put in front of him. Then there was a moment's silence. The huge drawing room of the Reform Club was quiet. But outside could be heard the noise of the crowd, and sometimes above that, high-pitched shouting. The clock pendulum marked the seconds with mathematical regularity. Each player could count on the 16th of a minute that he heard quite distinctly. 8:44, said John Stewart. Not, sorry, 8:44, said John Sullivan in a tone of voice that accidentally betrayed his emotion. Only a minute to go, and the bet was won. Andrew Stewart and his colleagues had stopped playing. They had put aside their cards. They were counting the seconds. At the 40th second, there was nothing. At the 50th, still nothing. At the 55th, they heard what sounded like thunder outside, applause and hurrahs, and even some swearing, which got louder and louder as it rolled unstoppably towards them. The card players got to their feet. At the 57th second, the drawing room door opened, and before the pendulum had struck the 60th second, Phileas Fogg appeared, escorted by a jubilant crowd that had forced its way into the club. And in his calm voice, he said, "Here I am, gentlemen." Now that is interesting, my dear scholars. But what's happened? I mean, we were certain that Phileas Fogg had missed his deadline. How did he manage to win? Does he have a twin? Did he teleport himself? Is he magical? Maybe he's magical. How did he do it? Well, we got one more chapter, my dear scholars. A very short chapter to find out just what happened. Shall we continue, my dear scholars? Shall we see how Phileas Fogg won his little bet? 20, yes, yes, yes. Using. All right then. Chapter 37, in which it is proved that Phileas Fogg has gained nothing from this journey around the world other than happiness. Yes, it was Phileas Fogg in person. It will be remembered that at 8:30 in the evening, about 25 hours since the travelers had got back to London, Passepartout had been told to inform Reverend Samuel Wilson about a certain wedding that was due to take place the very next day. So, Passepartout had set off, absolutely delighted at the idea. Zen clearly used his stand, Daft Punk, allowing him to quick travel to England. Oh my goodness, that is great. I mean, he's eccentric enough to be a stand user, let's be honest. So Passepartout had set off, absolutely delighted at the idea. He quickly went along to Reverend Samuel Wilson's house, but the clergyman had not yet got back. Passepartout decided to wait, which he did for a good 20 minutes at least. It was 8:35 before he was able to leave the clergyman's house. But what a state he was in by then. His hair was all over the place. He was without his hat and running as no one has ever run before, knocking over passers-by, rushing along the pavement at breakneck speed. It took him 3 minutes to get back to the house in Savile Row, and he collapsed out of breath on the floor of Mr. Fogg's bedroom. He was unable to speak. "What's the matter?" asked Mr. Fogg.
"Master," stammered Passepartout, "wedding impossible."
"Impossible?
Impossible for tomorrow.
Why?"
Because tomorrow is Sunday."
"Monday," replied Mr. Fogg.
"No, today, Saturday."
"Saturday? Impossible."
"Yes, yes, yes," exclaimed Passepartout. "You are a day out. We arrived 24 hours early, but there are only 10 minutes left."
Passepartout had seized his master by the collar, and he was dragging him off with irresistible force. After being snatched away like this, and without having the time to think, Phileas Fogg left his room and his house, jumped into a cab, promised the driver £100, and after running over 2 dogs— "Oh, come on, Fogg! I know it's an important bet, but running over dogs?" And bumping into 5 carriages, reached the Reform Club. The clock was showing 8:45 when he appeared in the main drawing room. Phileas Fogg had completed his journey around the world in 80 days. Phileas Fogg had won his £20,000 bet. Excuse me about that. Excuse me about that cough. Oh my goodness, my dear scholar. Sorry about that. So, how could a man who was so precise and meticulous have been a day out in his calculations? How could he think, when he arrived in London, that it was Saturday evening of 21st December, when it was instead Friday the 20th of December, only 79 days after he set out? And this is the thing that Verne always liked to do. He always liked to include some scientific fact in these adventure stories. The explanation of this mistake is very simple, and here it is. Without realizing it, Phileas Fogg had gained a day during his journey, simply because he had gone around the world from west to east, just as he would have lost a day if he had gone in the opposite direction, from east to west. By traveling eastward, Phileas Fogg had gone towards the sun, and therefore the days became shorter for him by 4 minutes with every degree of longitude he crossed in that direction. As the Earth has a circumference of 360 degrees, these 360 degrees, oh boy, math. These 360 degrees multiplied by 4 minutes gave exactly 24 hours. That is the day that he had gained without being aware of it. In other words, by going eastward, Phileas Fogg had seen the sun cross the Meridian 80 times, whereas his colleagues back in London had only seen it cross 79 times. This is why on that very day, which was a Saturday and not a Sunday, as Phileas Fogg thought, these gentlemen were waiting for him in the drawing room of the Reform Club. And this is what Passepartout's famous watch, which was still set on London time, would have told him if he had shown the days as well as the minutes and hours. Phileas Fogg had therefore won the £20,000 bet. Yeah, Phileas Fogg had therefore won the £20,000. But as he had spent about £19,000 during his journey, the financial return wasn't very great. However, as has already been said, what had made this eccentric gentleman take on the bet was the challenge, not the money. What was more, he divided up the remaining £1,000 between the trusty Passepartout and the unfortunate Fix, towards whom he could feel no resentment. The only thing was that on a point of principle, he held back from his servant the cost of 1,920 hours of gas that Passepartout had been responsible for wasting. That same evening, Mr. Fogg, as impassive and phlegmatic as ever, said to Mrs. Aouda, "Are you still prepared to marry me, madam?" No, that I got the wrong voice. Oh my goodness. Are you still prepared to marry me, madam? "Mr. Fogg," replied Mrs. Aouda. I'm messing up voices left and right. I'm the one. I'm the one who should be asking this question. You were ruined, but now you are rich. I beg your pardon, madam, but this wealth belongs to you. If you hadn't thought of getting married, my servant wouldn't have gone to Reverend Samuel Wilson. I wouldn't have been informed of my error, and "Dear Mr. Fogg," said the young woman. "Dear, dear Aouda," replied Phileas Fogg. It will come as no surprise to learn that the wedding took place 48 hours later, and that Passepartout, looking magnificent, resplendent, and dazzling, gave her away. After all, hadn't he been the one who rescued her? And wasn't this honor owing to him? Nevertheless, the following day, at the crack of dawn, Passepartout was hanging on his master's door. The door opened, and the impassive gentleman appeared. "What's the matter, Passepartout?" said, I'm now imagining them all wearing JoJo outfits. Oh my, I'd love to see a picture of that in church. Oh my goodness, then. Oh my goodness, I'd love to see a picture of that. "What's the matter, Passepartout?" "What's the matter, sir, is something I've just discovered this minute." "Which is?" "That we could have gone around the world in only 79 days." "Certainly," replied Mr. Fogg, "by not going across India. But if I hadn't gone across India, I wouldn't have rescued Mrs. Aouda, and she wouldn't now be my wife, and—" With that, Mr. Fogg quietly closed the door. Excuse me. And so, Phileas Fogg had won his bet. He had completed this journey around the world in 80 days. To do so, he had used all possible means of transport: steamships, railways, carriages, yachts, commercial vessels, a sledge, and an elephant. The eccentric gentleman had displayed throughout his outstanding qualities of composure and precision. But apart from this, what had he gained from all this travel? What had the journey brought him? Nothing, it could be said. Nothing, that is, except for a charming wife, who, how unlikely as it may seem, made him the happiest of men. And in all truth, isn't this more than enough reward for going around the world? The end. Oh my goodness, that was a lovely book. Although there were some rough pieces, but yes, overall, very lovely. Yulin 20, fantastic job, great story. Oh, thank you, thank you. Yes, the movie version, 1955 version, ends. They don't make. Well, here's the thing. In the book, as you know, as Fogg gets directly to the Reform Club in very much a hurry, except for killing those two dogs. Whereas in the movie version, he he runs into several issues that delays him further. He makes it in the end, but just barely. He enters just as the clock goes off. He's on time, of course. But yes, the ending's also very abrupt. Very abrupt. We don't have any wedding, though it is, of course, mentioned that they're going to get married. And it ends on a very, very silly note. Um, I would love to show this movie, the movie version, in one of the discords I'm a part of. So I will see what I can do, my dear scholars. That might be a fun little showing. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, but it is a very, very long movie. I think it's about 3 hours long, but it is spectacular. Um, as much as we have time, I'm going to stop the stream tonight here. As you can tell, my voice is still a little bit rough. I still want to rest it up for future streams. And, I think it'd be a good idea. After all, I just came back, my dear scholars. So next week, if I'm feeling up to it, we'll be doing more Ace Attorney on Tuesday. And on Thursday, we'll be doing a public domain movie stream, which I will announce then. If, again, everything goes according to plan and I'm feeling up to it. So then, let's see who we can raid tonight. Unit 20, thank you and good night. If I can get my. Oh dear. Might have a problem. Um, Give me a second, my dear scholars. I might have a little issue here. Okay, let's see. You know, let's go raid Abs. Abs. I don't think we haven't raid her in a long time. She's playing Raft. So then, my dear scholars, I say unto you, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Till we meet each other again at the study. Till then, I shall see you next time. Farewell and bye bye.